Thank you. Cool. So, my name's Gwen Diagram. I'm Principal Test Engineer at Sky, and you can catch me at Gwen Diagram on Twitter. So, a little bit about me. I run the Leeds Testing Atelier. I fucking love running the Leeds Testing Atelier. It's great, and if you haven't come along, please come along. But I also am helping start up Ministry of Testing Leeds. So the first one's going to be on the 28th of June. It will be at Infinity Works. This is hot off the press. We figured out a venue yesterday after speaking to loads of venues, and I'm really amazed at how expensive it is. So Infinity Works are giving it to us for free, which is the right price. So, as I said, I wrote the title of this talk, and then I realized that I should actually read the book, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People. So it's a really awesome book from the 1930s by a chap called, and I say his name wrong every single time, Dale Carnegie. So who can correct me? Brilliant, thank you. Carnegie. He was an American writer and lecturer on how to be a better person and work well in business and in life, basically. So I listened to the original 1980s recording on Audible, and I really recommend it. The dude who narrates it has the most beautiful old school American voice, and it's just really lovely to listen to. So I'm going to be using some of Dale's teachings. So look out for his quotes in slides that look exactly like this. So how this all started. I had an interview with the other senior tester and the principal engineer. So in the interview, I asked what automation frameworks were used. Frameworks included Spock, Scala Test, Thucydides, which is now Serenity, JBehave, JUnit, Mocha, Karma, and Cucumber. So a lot of frameworks. So I asked what languages were used, and they used a Groovy, Java, and Scala. So it sounded like a bit of a mess, but I'm pretty into that. Messes mean that it's not boring and I'm going to be entertained, which is good. But it was a lot worse than it actually sounded in the interview. As everyone knows, jobs always are. So I joined the front-end team. What we had was we had two front-end teams and a back-end team. All three were APIs, but both front-end teams were proxy APIs as well. So the front end that I joined also had a website that looked kind of like this. The front end I worked on had the API and the website, and both of these were written in Groovy. And we'd somehow managed to find Groovy developers. Yeah, so it was also a world of Siren JSON. So this is too long to put vertical, but this is a little bit of a taster of Siren JSON. It's Helios, so it's directing the user where to go after each interaction with the API. So it's really difficult to navigate around, and it's really difficult to write tests in. So you can probably imagine trying to write tests to that. It's pretty hard. So when we looked into the tests, we discovered that there were no acceptance test layer tests running as part of the build. Instead of acceptance tests, they had these magical functional tests. So these covered a lot of different layers of testing. So when people say functional tests, it's very possible you're going to encounter some issues. They also had integration tests, which strangely were the functional tests written with instead of a mock. They were actually against a real system. So the tests at both layers were the same. They were both written by the developers, and they were just duplicated. No one could agree exactly what functional tests were, which caused loads of arguments. So if you encounter this situation, I recommend getting the naming of test layers sorted as quickly as possible. Otherwise, people will just argue forever. So what really happened here was we had a whole load of slow and flaky tests. At the start of my time there, we had a load of image changes. And so the two front-end developers were working on making really simple changes and checking in their work. We had tests running on the build server here, but the issue was that these tests would take half an hour to run, and they were flaky, so they would fail. It would sometimes require 4 reruns for the test to pass, even though the developers knew that they hadn't actually changed anything of any importance. So it would have been really easy to exclude these tests from the build, but one person doing it means that everyone will do it, and that they'll continue to be excluded. So don't encourage this kind of behavior. quite obviously encourage fixing the tests. So this was pretty bad for the developers, but when I first looked into how we were going to release this software as a tester, it was looking even worse. So there were some UI layer tests written in Thucydides over the top of JBehave. So if you don't know these two tools, they're both BDD frameworks. So how they managed to layer these BDD frameworks on top of me, I have no idea. But it was really terrible. That's a very terrible idea. And it was really difficult to navigate. And yeah, so they were for the front-end website. They were using Selenium as a library. So I looked into Jenkins, and these tests hadn't been run in over a year and a half. And we had absolutely no idea of how most of the system was meant to work. We inherited all of this system from a London team, as there were no unit tests, and there were no working UI level tests either. Changing things was pretty terrifying. The release system was we released to an RPM. We released an RPM to all the test environments, and then 2 testers spent 2 days manually testing the different components. Now, I'm the laziest shit alive. So my testers and I were having lunch one time and talking about how we were. One of the testers, he is really, really thorough. And one, he's so-so, and I'm cowboy as fuck. So there's no way in hell I want to spend 2 days testing some boring shit application. So there were also some smoke tests, which were written in Groovy, of course, but they couldn't be run on the Jenkins box as someone had upgraded Firefox and not actually sorted out the tests. So these had to be run manually on your machine, and you had to ensure that you downgraded to the right version of Firefox. So at the time, the version that we had to use was Firefox 31. Firefox 46 was out, so yeah. But there were only 13 of these tests. So as you can imagine, we had a test team that was totally champing at the bit to try and get some automation up and running. And they all had different opinions on how they wanted to do it. As testers, we generally write any language, although of course we totally have our favorites. So the mix we had was, we had 2 Ruby testers, we had 2 C# testers, one of them was me, we had 1 Java tester, and 1 Python tester. So everyone thinks their language is the best because like C# is totally the best. But we needed a framework that absolutely everyone could use. So, throw down a challenge. We needed to write these smoke tests, and the best way was to throw down a challenge. We'd write it in our different languages that we'd chosen and present it to the team. So we had a mix of Cucumber, Ruby, and Selenium, Gauge, Java, and Selenium, Cucumber, Java, and Selenium, and Cucumber, Python, and Selenium. You can tell people are quite into Cucumber. So we gave everyone a week to do it in. This meant that everyone had a totally fair chance of building their frameworks to show everyone else. Now, when I said to show everybody else, this is where it became really unfair. And I didn't think of it until it was actually happening. We didn't mention at the start of building the frameworks that it meant you had to show the framework to everyone at the end. And the team that I was in was quite large. So there was about 60 people. There was testers, developers, Scrum Masters, DevOps, and other people. So the tester that built the framework the best, as she was by far the best developer out of all of us, she was writing it in a language that she knew and she absolutely loved. She had a really unfair disadvantage in the fact that she was really shy, and she really doesn't enjoy getting up in front of people. So unfortunately, Python wasn't going to be chosen as a language because she couldn't present it. So when setting a challenge like this, ensure that it's actually fair. Python really didn't stand a chance, and that really sucks. So merely stating a truth isn't enough. The truth has to be made vivid, interesting, and dramatic. You have to use showmanship. The movies do it, television does it, and you will have to do it too if you want attention. So, back to the presentations. We showed off our different frameworks and explained the benefits of each. If you hadn't heard of Gauge, it's an open source tool to write test cases in. It's really similar to Cucumber, except it doesn't need to follow the given, when, then pattern. Personally, I really don't like the given, when, then pattern, as I've never heard anyone speak like that, so I don't understand why I should have to write my tests like that. The only way I can get you to do anything is by giving you what you want. So Gauge also has some really amazing reporting. And working with developers previously, I knew that developers absolutely loved the reporting from Gauge. Cucumber reports at the time were really quite clunky, and they weren't as easy to follow as Gauge. So I also knew that we had a bunch of JVM developers in the room, even if they focused on Groovy, bless their soul, or Scala instead of Java, and so Java would most likely win them over. We all voted and we chose Gauge and Java as a framework. So perhaps a little bit of showmanship, knowing what developers particularly liked in there helped, or maybe I just chose the right framework from the start. But it ended up that we had the developers on board as well, which is so, so important. And we were going to be using this across the board to write our new framework in. Arouse in the other person an eager want. So it's funny, because testers actually get to write a lot more code than developers, especially when you're backfilling test cases. Here we asked for help from the developers, and they assisted us with improving the structure of the test cases. We made our code way more fun to write than the production code. So this encouraged cross-discipline pairing, which built a stronger team. So we had the smoke test written. This, of course, was totally the smallest of our worries. So the smoke test didn't stop the testers from having to perform 2 days of testing for a product. The smoke tests really gave us diddly squat, as there was something, if I remember correctly, they actually ran, but they were a really easy part of the system to tackle. So the actual chunk of tests that were important here were the really horrific JBehave Serenity tests that weren't running and hadn't been running for a year and a half. And these were hard to tackle. They were almost impossible. Several people had looked at these, but to absolutely no avail, really. They were really impenetrable in their messiness. So we decided to tackle something else for the meantime. So fixing the UI tests also wasn't for the benefit of the entire team. As I said at the start, there was actually only one team that used a UI. So the rest of the team, the proxy API and the API layer with the core system, absolutely wouldn't have benefited from the UI tests at all. We wouldn't have been able to share knowledge of how we were building the tests. So instead, we started on the API acceptance tests. So unfortunately, this wasn't done in the same manner as choosing the frameworks. This was done as a bit more of a solo endeavor. And the problems from this are still around. Don't choose technology as a solo. That's me, that's not Dale. Yeah. So also the problem here was I was writing the API test for a system that remembers Siren JSON. It used Siren JSON, which it's really complex, so my projos weren't very pretty. Actually, hell, I couldn't even fucking write projos because it's such a mess. Well, I could, but yeah, it's really difficult to use. So we use JSON path, which is kind of like XPath, but for JSON, where the other testers use more sensible libraries, such as JSON or Jackson. Well, this caused all kind of headaches. So this was pretty much our largest mistake with these frameworks, and we are totally still paying for it. Well, the team are now looking into JSON-IDA to solve this, as we basically needed to start from scratch in regards to a deserializer, as you'd be surprised at how attached people get to their different libraries. So we'll need to replace it entirely. The only way to get the best out of an argument is to avoid it. So we aren't going to solve this issue by people shouting each other down by saying that JSON or Jackson is better. And in the end, who actually cares? Start anew. Libraries move on and get better. Sell the new and don't dwindle on the old. On the topic of JSON-IDA, the way we found out about it is the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar, which was just released, I think, yeah, last week. If you haven't had a look yet, totally have a look. It's badass. So Ash, I hired him as a contractor, which is weird, but yeah. So he spends an hour a month reviewing the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar to check out what new and exciting tools have come about. So we use the Tech Radar for more than this, though. We implemented the Tech Radar so choices like the whole deserializer mess won't bite you. Any proposals for new tools They come through the tech radar, which is looked at once a week by the entire development team. In theory, it doesn't happen, but it'd be nice if it did. So when we review pull requests that doesn't meet what's on the tech radar, we can reject them for this reason. Therefore, we can keep our code base really coherent and clean. This is really important. So, as I meant, well, the front end of the system had almost no unit tests, which was causing really long build times as we had these stupid functional tests that were written instead of the unit tests. What's most surprising here is that the developers had to actually be trained in how to write unit tests. Not all of them, but quite a few. So quite a few had actually never written unit tests before. And the idea of unit tests had to be sold to them. Talk in terms of the other person's interest. So we had to discuss with the developers what a unit test was and why it was a good idea to do it, why refactoring without unit tests is scary, and what guidelines we had for unit tests. Focusing on refactoring meant that the developers understood how doing this would benefit them, and it wouldn't just seem like a lot of work for very little payoff. The front-end API was notoriously difficult to work with, as it was in Groovy, therefore had a lot of Groovy magic. So touching one piece of code could possibly change another dimension without us even knowing. So we had to make what a unit was clear. So unit tests, this is for us. It will differ for you. Unit tests should cover isolated bits of code. If code is inherited from another class, do not test that class in the inheritance. Component tests should cover this. Derived classes are just testing change code. You remember I stated at the start that we had functional tests and integration tests that were the same without mocks. Don't do that, that's bad, that's stupid. Code reviews had to include the inclusion of unit tests. It was quite a strange experience explaining unit tests to developers, but it was really worth it. So don't assume that people understand everything, because you'll find that sometimes they won't ask due to being shy or due to cultural differences. Sometimes people just won't pipe up and ask. Which brings us to another section. While I was messing around with one of the components, there were some really large problems going on within another component, which was the back end. There were constant arguments about two sets of tests, the cucumber test and the gauge test. So the developers in that team, they had unit tests, so they were pretty organized, well, a lot more organized than the ones I was dealing with. They also had integration tests, and the testers were writing the acceptance tests. So we had two testers on it, and then due to a set of circumstances, we ended up with none. So it was about this point in time that it was starting to become apparent that these component teams totally weren't working. I'd moved into the proxy API team, which was over the other side of the office, and it was really interesting, as I was so far away from the team that I'd originally started in that I had to learn how their entire system worked. People were in the same tribe, working on pieces of software that integrated without knowing how another component that it actually integrated in with worked at all. It wasn't just the testers that had this problem either. It was the developers too. So the developers were writing different languages, and if someone was sitting over the other side of the office, there was a fairly good chance that they hadn't even spoken to them before. And we'd also had a new head of tech join who wanted to make his mark, and I got promoted to test manager as I was the only senior left. And we came up with this fantastic idea of feature squads on an away day, and we worked together as a leadership team to work out how this would work. So let the other person feel like the idea is his or hers. So we came back from the away day, and without any planning, one of the Scrum Masters presented the idea of feature squads. This was a fucking disaster. They were pretty much riots. The way it was presented was in this overcomplicated diagram, and everyone thought it was a really ridiculous idea because it was forced upon them. So we set up working groups to discuss how we could actually get this implemented. The working groups identified issues that could come from working in feature squads, and we came back together to see how we could present it to the team actually prepared this time. Dramatize your ideas. So, who here has seen the infomercial for Hello Nasty, the Beastie Boys album? Ah, nice. Okay, I'm going to show you a clip of it. It's a work of art. It's overdone, it's ridiculous, and absolutely brilliant. Here. Ah.
The following program is a
Here's a clip.
advertisement and expresses the opinions of the producers and not necessarily of this network. The Juice Ladies.
Hi, I'm Peg. This is Viv.
Did you miss us?
And we're here with the studio juicer today.
We had some trouble last week with the,
Little racy with raisins.
and to rectify those raisins. We had to reduce, but
But
now
everybody knows us because we have fun.
with fruit.
You know what? Let's invite someone up here with us. They can share in this juice.
I think so.
Do we have a volunteer from the audience? Sir, in the front row?
Actually,
So, Bud, come right in here.
how are you
Join
feeling
us
today?
right in here.
I'm okay.
What's your name, sir?
My name's John.
Oh, John.
John.
It's fun. This is give that a try. Come on, give it a try.
Fun. Okay.
Wow!
Now we
Really good.
have a surprise for you. You'll love this. Now
Woo,
look
woo.
what
Wow,
this
man.
machine does. Go on, Bill.
You are-
Second
Now
machine.
this machine is my favorite. What happens when we push this button is this.
Okay, so infomercials know how to sell shit. So we were sitting there discussing how we were going to present the idea, and I asked the team to watch a snippet of that. The thing with infomercials is they look into the way of how to actually sell something, how to appeal to your audience. There is a specific formula, and if you have to present something that is this important, that is going to change the way that 60 people work, make sure you look into it and look into how it's going to appeal to them. So, the structure I followed for this was statement of what the problem is, proposal of the solution, I got some testimonials, concerns of the proposed solution, which we got from these little working groups, and how the solution takes care of the concerns, and then repetition of the solution. Repetition is really important in infomercials. So, everyone knew that I was using really cheap selling techniques, but I made it fun. It ended up that everyone agreed to work in feature teams because we actually prepared ourselves to sell the idea, and by including people in the discussion, it helped them feel like the idea was theirs as well. So by this point, we had people working across different components, we had people writing tests, and I was managing the testers, so I'd been able to actually start coaching them. It was by this point that we received the news that the bigwigs were coming up from London. So I hadn't actually met them before, but word on the street was that they thought testing was an absolute fucking waste of time. So they really hated testing, then they hated what it costed. So I apparently had quite a big sell on my hands. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by getting other people interested in you. So we were told that we would have an hour with them. And with that, we had to present the technology strategy, the feature team strategy, and the testing strategy. Now, I didn't do this by myself. I work with a really rad principal engineer who speaks as well, and he had noted what these higher-ups actually wanted, which could be found in their newsletters. So based his technology strategy around that. Sometimes they'll just tell you what they actually want, so keep an eye out for newsletters and stuff like that. So Joe knew what their interests were. and based the technology strategy to that, and they absolutely loved it. I wasn't that lucky, of course, because they weren't that keen on testing, apparently. So I had to do things a little bit differently. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So when the higher-ups were coming, I was really excited. I hadn't met them before, and well, if you have them on your good side, it means that you can get funding for your projects. So this was a pretty good opportunity to make a really good impression on them. So I brought cake. I brought chocolates, I brought biscuits, just whatever. People fucking love cake. Yeah, that's why you've got cake. So if you have a visitor, provide food, make them feel welcome, and like you were excited to see them. I totally was, but cake cemented it. Actions speak louder than words, and a smile says, I like you. You make me happy. I'm glad to see you. So look at them in their eyes, shake their hands, smile. I do this and it really scares people. Try not to scare them. They don't know you either. And yes, they might get paid more, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to feel comfortable. Smile and make them feel welcome. Remember that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. There are only 3 people that we were presenting this to. If you're presenting an idea to a small group of people, call them out by name. Say how wonderful it is to have them there, because it actually is. They've taken time out of their schedule to come and see you. Make them feel like it was worth it. So, although these people might not have given a fuck about testing, they left that room happy and they listened to me because I made them feel important. And well, I thought that they were important for taking some time out of their day. And here is the test strategy that I proposed to them. So, this is Identity's test strategy. I'm Gwen Diagram. I was in the Identity tribe. First off, I'm going to start off with a basic theory of why we test. Testing creates confidence that your product works, or perhaps the avoidance of doubt that your product will break. Sky should be a synonym for quality. We want to ensure that customers can log on to the platform at any time, whether it be to watch Friends at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday or Game of Thrones at 9 p.m. on a Monday night. The Identity platform should be always available, frictionless, and secure for the customer. Via performance, load security, and automated testing, we can create a Sky product that can be deployed quickly with known quality. Testing also ensures that we are delivering software of value. By aligning with the business on what scenarios are expected within the application, we can deliver a journey-driven solution which adds value to the product. But really, why test? Stable system isn't just for the customers. Working in the Spotify model, it isn't only the ops team on call. Team members from all disciplines are on call. Creating a stable, tested piece of software means that your life is easier as a member of the Identity team, as you won't be the one getting woken up at 2 a.m. to keep the system up. It's all very well and good wanting a system that is stable with a minimum amount of show-stopping bugs, but how do we actually create a quality system? Identity want to look at the testing pyramid a little bit differently. We would like to reimagine the test pyramid instead as a bug filter. Only bugs unable to be found by the prior component of testing will be able to reach the next stage of testing. We will cover unit, component, integration, acceptance, end-to-end, and exploratory testing. In the future, I'd like to align the bug filter to our continuous deployment pipelines. Unit testing will be the layer with the largest amount of tests. Having a large unit testing layer has quite a few benefits. Unit tests are quick to write, and they greatly assist when refactoring units of code. If code is written without unit tests, it's very difficult to go back and refactor that code, as the developer will be unable to see if refactoring has broken anything. A component test is a test that limits the scope of the exercise software to a portion of the system under test. Component tests will frequently include mocked or stubbed components, so that the tested functionality can be isolated to the component that the developer is interested in testing. Integration tests cover multiple components and will find issues between multiple components speaking to each other. Acceptance tests will be written to the acceptance criteria on a card. and written in clear language that can be reused for business documentation for specific areas of functionality. End-to-end tests cover user journeys and will be the journeys that customers are actually making through the product. And exploratory testing will only catch the most subtle bugs, bugs that haven't been caught via automation. Next, I will be showing you how we are planning to make the Identity Tribe excellent through support and learning. Part of the purpose of the tests are also documentation around the application. The tests create many opportunities for learning, especially sharing knowledge across disciplines. Learning also brings us together and builds better bonds within our team. With strengthened communication, we should be able to work in a more cohesive manner to deliver more cohesive software. Developers and testers pair across the tribe, which promotes cross-learning. The developers learn more about testing, and the testers learn more about development. This also improves quality across the product, as 2 heads on each part of the process is way better than 1. Pairing also allows the sharing of technical knowledge and the development of shared techniques. More consistent code helps remove the mental barrier to exploring a previously written test, allowing the observer to focus on the testing element. Through the Testing Guild, we're building up a mentoring relationship with the testers. We want to encourage the testers to grow in the right direction. And with an identity, we have many fantastic directions that they can go in. With our team interested in their work, we will be able to deliver better software. We've started chapterships within the tribe in Identity, where we're bringing all the testers, the Scrum Masters, and the developers together in their retrospective specialisms to share knowledge and discuss common issues, and solve them together as a team. Joe's implemented Fat Fridays, where the tribe can work together to solve issues that have occurred during the sprints. During Fat Friday times, we've solved pressing issues like building off branches, Dockerizing some of the applications, and working on cool new test frameworks. This is also a really great place for the team to learn together. While mentoring the testing team members, we can focus on where the individual is at the moment and where they actually want to be. If they're interested in security testing, we can pair them with someone in the tribe who has this knowledge and recommend some courses for them, for example. We want our team members to be constantly learning and not only to be proud of their work, but to be proud of where they work. So thank you, especially to Noah Sussman for the testing cone concept and Ash for his wheel of testing. Thank you so much for Corecom for having me. And this is for Sky, so that I wrote for Sky. It doesn't have to be for Sky. You can put that anywhere. So I'm sure a lot of the concepts in that will be able to work for you as well.